The first ever NieR game was released by Square Enix all the way back in 2010, which is a decade away at this point, believe it or not. The user reviews were mixed and the sales numbers were quite poor. Despite the many points of justified criticism, to many this game aged like fine wine, and people started to appreciate the game for what it was, even if it did have its flaws. It was then that Square Enix released the second game in the NieR series, NieR Automata. And let me tell you this much, Square Enix hit the jackpot with this one. Both game reviewers and users love this game, and there are a bunch of people that would consider this game to be in their personal top 10 games of all time. The sales shot up to a whopping 4 million units sold by May 2019. Me, being the uncultured swine that I am, was unaware of the existence of this game until earlier this year, when I was able to cop it on Steam for half the price. Back then I had a bunch of videos planned and I basically let the game collect dust in a dark corner. But at the end of September this year, I finally got to it. And man, I'm gonna enjoy talking about this game a whole damn lot. NieR Automata takes place in a world where humanity has completely fled the Earth after these beings of another world invaded it with an army of machines. These aggressive mechanical life forms were too much of a threat, so the humans were forced to a bunker located on the moon. To take back the Earth, the humans then created a resistance force of android warriors in order to take back what's theirs. And this is where you come into play. You start this game as Android 2B, a female android that is about to be sent towards Earth for an initial invasion, to take down a Goliath machine on Earth with her fellow Type B androids. However, her entire squad is annihilated by machines before landing, and she's the only one to survive. This is where you meet your partner in 9S, a scanner android. Because your entire squad is wiped out, he tells you he'll be providing support during this Goliath destruction mission. And this is when you actually get to play the game and experience what it's all about for the very first time. You come across and destroy all of these machines that have seemingly lost their mind. If they ever had one, that is. The abandoned factory environment and the crazy ass machines immediately grab your attention and make you wonder what on earth happened to this planet. No pun intended. After plowing through these hordes of machines, the game climaxes into this epic fight against the Goliath, which you kind of win, but also don't. After a good effort and the amputation of half of 9S's limbs, you beat the Goliath and everything seems fine. But then, a couple more Goliaths show up and the intro ends with a very emotional scene where 9S and 2B self-destruct in order to beat these enemies. What a crazy introduction to a video game. Then the game truly begins. Because you're an android, you didn't really die. You just became a new 2B model and voila, you're good to go. One thing to note here is that 9S was able to upload your data to the bunker in time during the Goliath fight, but he was unable to do so for himself. As a result of that, he has no clue what happened during the Goliath part. And funnily enough, this moment is revealed to have a really dark meaning way later on in the game. Anyway, 9S and you are then sent back to Earth to help the resistance and defeat the machines. From this point on, the story just progresses at a quote-unquote relaxed pace. You're assigned to things such as explore areas, to simply destroy machine life forms, or to protect the Yora ship from the machines. Oh, and 9S is missing at some point, but who cares? While completing all of these story objectives, you learn that not all machines are bad. Some of them aren't out to harm you at all. They have emotions and children, and you really start to like the machines and not even see them as the enemy anymore. These friendly machines have simply copied human behavior and they are imitating the civilization that once existed. The real turning point for me was walking into Pascal's village for the first time. Pascal's village consists of friendly machines that only want peace and happiness in the world. Pascal is the leader of the bunch, as you might have figured out by the name of the village, and he's the most likable machine ever. He's just really caring and sweet and he just wants the best for everybody. How can one not like the machines after meeting Pascal and seeing the entire village wave their white flags like in this clip? Anyway, after exploring each area you fight these machine bosses that seem to be even crazier than the regular enemies. And at the end there's this final boss fight where you basically defeat the leader of the machines. Now, after playing this game for 16 hours, I thought that was it. Pretty standard game. Explore area, do boss fight, move on. But no, that's just the beginning. To clarify what I mean by that, let me tell you that even though the credits roll after beating the final boss, this is only the first of many endings. This game has 26 endings, all of them representing a letter of the alphabet with a clever pun. Now, not all of these are real endings. The main storyline consists of A, B, C, D and E, with the remaining 21 being meme endings hidden in these 5. For example, there's this one where I went the wrong way by accident and the game just ends because NieR supposedly disappeared forever. Now that that's explained, I'm sure you understand that the 2B story that I just talked about was only Route A. Now, while I'm not gonna spoil the actual storyline of the game that develops after Route A, I do want to talk about them because they add so much to the experience as an addition to everything you'll encounter in Route A. After completing 2B's storyline, you'll see the credits and get warped to the main menu. If you then start the save file again, you'll start Route B. This part of the game is the exact same storyline, but you're reliving it through NieR's eyes. Now, while this might seem really boring, since it looks like you're playing the game twice, it really isn't. Not only do you get to experience moments in the game on a different spot in the map, like the Goliath fight, you also get to hack into locked chests or machines by doing this funny minigame, and you are shown these cutscenes where you get to see the history of the development of the machines, ideas, feelings and why they act the way they do. In this boss fight I showed you earlier, the machine had murdered dozens of androids and even machines because she figured out that would make him recognize her existence. It didn't work, but she just kept going and going because she wanted him to recognize her. Having this creepy background explained by showing the machine's reasoning and emotions was incredibly fascinating to me. But it's not just the machines that supposedly developed emotions. You also get to look at NieR's development as a person. Like I said earlier, during 2B's part NieR goes missing for a while after suffering from an enormous crash, and you get to see him exploring his own system, emotions and feelings during this downtime, figuring out that yeah. Other than that, starting from this route, you get to occasionally play as different characters, and this stretches out all the way to Route C. You get to play as the pod that's always with you, random machines, Pascal, and even Pascal sitting inside of a giant Goliath while fighting another giant Goliath. So yeah, Route B isn't boring at all. But then we get to Route C, where the actual story begins. This route takes place after the event in Route A and B, and this is where you get to meet the final main character that you also meet like halfway through Route A. A2, aka the baby murderer. During this route you get to play as 2B, NieR and A2, and you switch between characters as the story progresses, which was really well done. Now, all I can say about where the story goes from here is everything
is fucked.
Like, I enjoyed the story and game up until this point, but the events and plot twists after had me on the edge of my seat up until the very end. Horror, sensation, sadness, it's got everything, and I'd say this is easily one of my favorite stories in any video game ever created. Now, Route D and Route E are unlocked by making different choices in Route C, but I won't be bothering you with those details. All I can say is that the climax in Route E is absolutely sensational. Anyway, after me drooling over a storyline, you'd almost forget I was reviewing a game here. Luckily, the gameplay is just as satisfying. NieR Automata is an open world game that takes place in the ruins of civilization, and you can really play the game at any pace you want. You can do story missions to, well, progress the story, you can take on one of the many side quests, or you can simply beat up the machines that are roaming throughout the map. And yes, as you can clearly tell by looking at this footage, this is a hack and slash type game. And this combat system is what I deem to be most fitting to start with, considering it's such a huge part of the gameplay. Each of the main characters combat these rogue machines with two possible weapons. A primary weapon like a sword or a spear, and an assisting drone thing called a pod that can do a bunch of cool stuff depending on what you've got equipped. But I primarily used the shooting one with the laser beam as a special. As you might have expected, these three characters don't all have the same weapon and pod. So you can have different weapons and pods equipped for every single one. Well, that's true to an extent, but because of story spoiler related reasons, I won't elaborate on that. The combat system is exactly what you expect from a hack and slash. It's these you versus the world type fights where you just beat up machine after machine. In terms of the melee combos, there seem to be endless combinations of cool ass things you could do. But I'm not the best at video games, so I ended up spamming square on my PS4 controller most of the time and still ended up feeling satisfied. The pod I used, however, was pretty basic. It just did what it was supposed to do. By pressing R1 it spammed shots in order to support me, and after every minute or so I could fire off a large laser beam with L2 in order to do a good chunk of damage. Obviously these enemies fight back as well, and thus you have this pretty nifty dodge option by pressing R2 once they're about to hit you. You can even combine this dodge with a damaging move afterwards, which I accidentally enabled, and to this day I still don't know how. Now, while this combat system turned out to be really satisfying, during the first 16 hours of gameplay I was under the impression that the developers really overvalued the shooting pod and that the melee combat was overshadowed as a result. My melee moves weren't doing any damage whatsoever, and both the range and damage output from the pod were better in any way, shape or form. After literally 16.1 hours, I figured out that this game had an interesting upgrade system in the form of chips. You can either buy these chips or get them as drops from enemies, after which you can equip them in order to gain cool things like more damage output, HP regain, more experience, etc. Hell, you can even combine chips into a better chip in order to make it even better and save space in the chip department. Because the amount of storage is limited, of course, even though you can buy significantly more room as you progress through the game. I wasn't aware of these chips until I started Route B, and after like spending 300k on it, I noticed the difference was literally night and day. My melee moves were suddenly doing a fuck ton of damage, and in terms of raw damage output it was way more efficient to get enemies out of the way. I still felt like the pod was favored over close combat, especially since there are upgrade chips for long range attacks as well, but at least I felt like I balanced both of them way more than before and the combat finally made sense. I will say though that the addition of the pod made it so that it doesn't take a genius to beat the game. Although the process is slower than combining both of them, you can easily just run in circles and hold down R1 and occasionally L2 in order to take down any enemy with the pod. It's an incredibly boring way of beating a game. Trust me, I can conclude that after 16 hours, but I have no doubt in my mind that it can be done. They counter the shooting only mechanic with some of the enemy designs that I'll get to in a bit, but I noticed I was just shooting my way through parts of a few fights when I felt like the game was making me sweat a little too hard. Anyway, other than the chips, there are more ways to make the fights a little more doable. For one, you are not bound to a single melee weapon or pod. An impressive variety of both can either be found throughout the map or bought in one of the shops. The melee weapons all vary in design, fighting animations, attacking speed and damage output, and the various pods basically all have different functions that don't have to necessarily be combat related either. For instance, there's this pod that literally does no damage at all, but simply helps you to find hidden items. On top of having an arsenal of weapons and pods to choose from, all of these are upgradable to a certain level as well. You can do this by collecting a set of required items needed to upgrade whatever item you're upgrading. You can obtain these items by either getting it as a drop from an enemy, just like chips, or you can find them just laying around on the floor as a random spawn at any part of the map. To further elaborate on this, I might as well include the final combat related thing at this point, even though I already mentioned them like once or twice in this video. The item shops. In various places you can find these shops that sell a bunch of stuff. Usually there are two shops next to each other, one for buying weapons and such, and the other for buying combat related items. Before I explain this any further, let me explain the link with items needed for upgrading the weapons. The thing is, I'm not very smart, and these shops have a sell option. Every time I cared enough about spending time on shopping, I had already forgot what items I needed to keep for the upgrades, and I simply didn't care enough to check and memorize what I needed. And yeah, that resulted in bulk selling all of my items every single time, which resulted in me not having the required items. Which resulted in me not even doing a single weapon or pod upgrade. In the end I never really needed it to begin with, but selling items for like 30 quid instead of upgrading my weapon for the rest of the game was most definitely a small brain move. Anyway, these shops can also help you even further in combat, if you're still too stupid to beat the game after applying everything I just talked about. These shops sell chips, different variations of recovery items, temporary boost items like a 30-second double drop rate or a 30-second defense spell, you name it. Throughout the entire game you can earn more than enough money from either finding and selling items or defeating enemies. So if you want you can pretty much buy out the entire shop at some point. In my opinion, the temporary boost spells are kind of an overkill, unless you play the game on extreme mode. So I just ended up buying 99 of every recovery item, and at the end of the game I had about 300-400k left in the bank. To close this ground combat segment, there's one more thing I should briefly mention. At any given time you're able to change 9S's tactics to any style you prefer. However, the differences between fighting styles was so marginal to me that I don't feel like elaborating any further on it. It's nice that they implemented it, but it's just kind of there. All in all, this combat system is really well thought out and it feels incredibly rewarding. Although the game strengthens the storyline by a long shot, there is barely anything that needs improvement. I especially like how much you can feel the difference between the different kinds of melee weapons and how you're supposed to utilize every single one of them. The noticeable differences between both the melee weapons and the pods really encourage the player to obtain these weapons and pods their playstyle requires, and thus you're being encouraged to mold your character to fit with your playstyle instead of the differences being a visual preference type thing like clothes in games such as GTA. There is one combat related thing that I didn't really care for though. The flying combat. Every android has one of these flying suits that are really strong, that can shoot, and that can bring them from point A to B really quickly. In terms of the storyline and certain events, this was a really logical inclusion and they fit really well. But why do I have to fight the exact same enemies every time my character uses these suits? Every single time I climb into this thing in order to go somewhere, fight the same enemies over and over, and then I arrive at my destination. The enemies aren't difficult, the controls feel clunky at times, and I just got bored of basically doing the same thing over and over again. I wish they just used these flying suits in the important fights and cutscenes only, like this one with the Goliath. They really felt like different scenes every time, and they at least had different attacks to dodge and different ways to get rid of them. In fact, I'd say I really enjoyed those fights. But it was so unnecessary to fight these random enemies every time I had to fly anywhere for story purposes, like...
Please.
I have never been an advocate of flying missions in video games, and this most certainly didn't change my opinion on the matter at all. All of these combat related elements have to be obviously used against something, and that brings me to my next topic. Enemy designs. Just like the weapons and pods, this game has a huge variety of different enemies. You have small machines, big machines, flying machines, crazy spinning flying ball shooting machines, you name it. When you think of machines or robots, you can literally think of anything. Because they're literally fictional creatures that can be made out of anything as basic as a steel beam, there's a lot of freedom in the design, and the developers took full advantage of that. Not only do the different types of enemies look really cool and unique, they also differ significantly in terms of movement and attacks. Based on whatever machine they are, they have different gimmicks and things to look out for. This stacked robot has to be shot down layer by layer before defeating it. This small looking robot just charges at you, albeit very slowly. This horse thing is literally a horse with a dude on it, and it acts like it too. And this machine has the most annoying spin attack in the world. Although the moves are fairly easy to dodge if you fight them one by one, which is almost never the case, you usually get like gangbanged by 15 of them, the difference between them really makes them stand out and memorable, opposed to just generic enemy 76 that looks like the previous 75. The most overlapping thing is the ball shooting attack, where the enemy shoots these pink and purple balls, with the latter being unbreakable, forcing the player to dodge them. Funnily enough, they even managed to make such a basic attack differ between enemies. Some of them fire faster than others, some of them shoot them straight into the air so they fall down on you, some of them shoot them in straight clusters, and then you have this crazy machine that just spins around, making it very hard to dodge all of them. Based on my previous experiences with games such as Star Wars Battlefront or Quantum Break, there's no denying that these enemies are top notch. But as per usual in video games, the best enemy designs shine through in the boss fights. These enemies look so damn cool, and combined with the backstory to most of these, the freaky design is even more impressive. Opposed to the regular enemies, these bosses are detailed to the bone. Or pipe. And this android eating machine in the abandoned attraction park even has multiple layers because of its different attacks and phases. Now we're at this particular boss fight anyway, let me just illustrate how different and awesome the boss's attacks are as well. Just look at the chaos during this fight. There are deadly rings of light flying everywhere, the machine is trying to ram itself into me, the dead possessed androids are helping with its attacks as well, and the scenery with the dead androids complementing this entire fight. Everything is so damn cool. Now, I should mention that this was my favorite fight of the game. But other fights like against the Goliath or this dude called Eve were just as enjoyable. The only boss fight that didn't have my color was this ball snake called Hegel, or Hegel. Anyway, it was a fight with A too. The sole reason is the fact that the way this fight is set up is straight cheeks. This ball snake flies through the air and you obviously have to shoot it with the pod at that point, but after a certain amount of seconds the snake rips apart and they fall down as separate balls with separate hitboxes. Now, during this time I really wanted to hit them with my melee weapon, but you simply don't get the chance. Upon dropping down, these balls try to push and corner you, after which they will fire their lasers. Now, this would be okay-ish if there weren't like 15 of these. All I did during these ground parts was running in circles while aiming my pod at random balls, after which they would go up again and form a snake, and basically the cycle repeated itself. This entire fight was just me shooting them while they were up in the air, running in circles while they were spamming lasers, and repeat until I finally won. The fact that there are like 15 of them to defeat made this fight very long and very tedious. Sure, it got better as soon as I downed like 10 of them, but the fight before that was so boring that I just turned the game volume to 0 and I put some music on to kill time. It really sucks because every other boss fight in this game is so fucking cool, and this one just feels like the one bad apple. Now, while fighting enemies is a huge part of the game, a lot of the fights are a part of a bigger picture. Which brings me to my next topic. Story missions and side quests. The story missions aren't really anything special, and I don't mean this in a negative way. Most of the story missions are simply to, well, progress the story, and there's not much more to it. Most of the story related missions are just aimed to make you explore new areas of the map while defeating various enemies, or to make your way to a boss fight or something. Now, I know this might sound like they weren't creative at all in terms of story missions, but that's not really what I mean. To me, these story missions are very story driven, and those types of missions don't need a gimmick of some sort. Just seeing the epic cutscenes and hearing the characters talk about the stuff they're discovering, is more than enough to make these missions enjoyable, and I'd even go as far as saying that adding too much variety would have ruined the experience. The story missions are all about figuring out what's going on in this world and why machines act the way they do. That doesn't necessarily need super special missions or anything. Besides, the side quests serve the purpose of adding variety and funny gimmicks to missions. Where the story quests are super serious and had me sitting on the edge of my chair, these side quests are a lot more laid back and a lot of fun to do. There's literally so much variety in these that they never get boring. You can pretty much do anything. You can race a machine across the map to the finish line, you can enter an underground fighting tournament, you can get asked to find some old remains with one of the search bots, you can get asked to defend a horde of machines marching in the name of peace. Do I even need to add more? These side quests were so much fun to do in between story missions, and there's not a single side quest that felt tedious or boring. Opposed to pretty much any other game, I was actually not opposed to doing these, because they always turned out to be a lot of fun. Of course these side quests give rewards as well, but especially after reaching the second half of the game, these rewards are so marginal that it really wasn't an incentive to do these. I really just did them because of fun related reasons. The biggest problem with these side quests is honestly that the story is so damn good that I just wanted to find out what happened next, and thus I kind of neglected side quests on several occasions. Especially after reaching Route C, I only did the side quests that were close to the main story objectives, because the story was so tense at this point that I just wanted to figure out what was going to happen next. One thing to note is that the story missions and the side quests are marked on the map, and thus you can easily find them and travel to them if you want. One thing I really like is that some of the missions are scenery related, and thus you can only find these side quests at random locations in, for example, the desert. However, even if you haven't found the side quest yet, they are still marked on the map as a bunch of question marks, so you can easily find them if you want, and it doesn't have to turn into a big search mission. Also, when you accept any of the story missions or side quests, no matter how vague the objective is, there will always be an area marked on the map, just to show you where you're generally supposed to be searching for whatever you need. This obviously made these objectives easier and less tedious to complete, and I personally think a lot of game developers can learn from such a simple feature. During the first couple of hours of the game, I was pretty annoyed by the amount of time it took to travel from objective to objective. Sure, you could tame these wild animals in order to ride on them and travel at a faster pace, but there are so many obstacles along the way that you are better off just traveling by foot instead. Like, this deer can't really climb a building, and thus I thought it was kinda useless. After a couple of story missions, this entire problem is eliminated, because you unlock traveling via these vending machine looking things. Now, while this is a very convenient feature and it completely eliminated any problem I had with traveling, it would have been nice if I knew about this feature before traveling to all of these side quests on foot. If I knew this would have been unlocked after a certain amount of main story missions, I obviously would have done those first instead of taking 10 minutes to travel from point A to point B during any side quest. Now that we're speaking of traveling, the developers added another really good travel feature. And I don't mean physically traveling, I mean traveling between different parts of the game. Because the developers added a nifty little thing called Chapter Select. This Chapter Select can be used for anything I just talked about. Whether you want to experience different parts of the story again, whether you want to achieve different endings, whether you want to do side quests again, whether you just want to beat up machines or absorb the atmosphere, you can do anything you want. The Chapter Select screen is really detailed and you can pretty much spawn in wherever you want. This feature is so goddamn easy to develop and it's so efficient, but yet many developers haven't thought about a feature like this at all. I mean, just think of GTA San Andreas, where I saved every 5 missions on a different save slot, just so I could spawn in easier wherever I wanted if I wanted to make a video on a certain mission or something. This way you don't have to do any of that, and I really appreciate that, and to this day I still don't understand why so many games don't have a chapter select option like this, so God bless Square Enix. Anyway, there is one more main topic left to talk about, and you have seen plenty of it during this video so far. The scenery. As you can probably tell at this point, the scenery of this game is beautiful. All of the different areas of the map look really good and have such an alive atmosphere. The desert has this atmosphere of loneliness and desertedness. The city ruins make you realize there was once a civilization just living their everyday lives. And the forest just has this really ominous atmosphere. You really feel the vibe the developers were trying to get across, and the graphics of every area most certainly enhance this feeling. Every area looks beautiful with its fitting structures and great attention to detail, and it really feels like you're walking in an abandoned version of the real world as we all know it. Another great aspect of these areas is many areas have specific machine enemies as well. Like the desert has these machines that look like nomads and that just pop out of the sand, and the Forest Kingdom has these soldiers that obey their Forest King, who is located in this castle. My favorite area by far is undoubtedly the attraction park. When you first walk in, you see all of these friendly machines that are parading and celebrating as if the attraction park is still open. In the back you see these fireworks, and the music that's playing is nothing short of beautiful. This area is incredibly overwhelming in a good way, and when I first entered this area, I just had to stand still for a bit to admire how well this area was designed. To add to that, I really liked that the areas didn't remain static either. The best example of this happens quite early on in the storyline. This Goliath found the city ruins and is looking to kill every single enemy that gets in its way. You then fight him with the mech suits, and after a lengthy boss battle, this Goliath is defeated. Upon doing so, however, his heavy ass crashes into the city and it transforms the scenery into this gigantic hole that serves as the scenery for not one, not two, but 3 plot-related events. Scenery changes like these are really cool to me, because you're not traveling through static areas every single time. This game has a good amount of scenery changes and pretty much all of them are plot related. Some are very innocent, but others are very disturbing and come out of nowhere, which made me end up with my mouth on my knees. So yeah, unnecessarily long story short, the looks and the usage of scenery are nothing short of perfect. But let's not forget about the rest of the visuals either. After more than 30 minutes, I highly doubt that I still have to convince any of you that this entire game just looks really good. Every animation and every visual effect is detailed to perfection, and let's not forget about the amazing visuals during the cutscenes either. My favorite parts about some of these visual effects is how they really make the game feel more alive and truly add something to the already satisfying gameplay experience. Whether we're talking about the part where 2B is infected by a virus and the whole screen just breaks more and more as you progress towards the next objective, or the part where 9S is fighting these machines that use a disrupting aura move to not only make certain combat functions malfunction, but also make the screen act like it's on an LSD trip, it all looks so damn cool. What more can I really say? One final thing to note is that the audio is on point as well. And by this, I don't just mean the amazing music, of which I'm not sure if it's copyrighted or not, but I also mean the incredible voice acting.
I have to repair him. Pod, get me staunching gel and logic virus vaccines, then access the—
Inadvisable. The subject's vital signs are too poor to attempt field repair.
Shut up! Just do what I say!
2B. Just go.
You shut up too.
At the very start of the video, I mentioned that the first NieR game got very mixed reactions, but one thing that was universally praised was the voice acting. And I'm glad they put the same amount of effort in this very thing in this game. I can count the games where the voice acting comes off as natural and full of emotion on 2 hands at the very most. And NieR Automata's voice acting can be added to this list without a doubt. I also think this is one of the bigger reasons as to why I love this story so much. Not only is the story well written, but the actors managed to enact it very well. At times, it even felt like a high-budget movie. But yeah, that's NieR Automata for ya. This video has truly been me kissing the game's ass, and I don't care at all. This game is genuinely one of the best games I have ever played, and I'm not ashamed of being an ass kisser for about 30 to 40 minutes. This game has everything you need. Amazing graphics, a fantastic story, a near perfect combat system, and very enjoyable missions. What more do you want? This game was 30 hours of pure fun, and that's all you really need to know. If you want to experience what a real masterpiece feels like, then buy this game whenever it's on sale on Steam. Because why not get a good deal at it while you're buying it anyway? Anyway, if you made it to the very end, shout out to you. And yeah, if you enjoyed this video, definitely leave a like rating. If you liked it even more, then definitely hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you in a couple of weeks for Watch Dogs Legion. Peace! Who gave these machines genitals?